So to start this off, so I'm Jeremiah Landi. I run Landi Industries. So what we wanted to talk about on this panel was getting into medical, selling into medical, and really the other side of the whole medical realm. A lot of times whenever you're doing any startup, especially in the medical realm, or even trying to do a traditional, it is how you push it, how you sell it, and nobody really provides that guidance. So even if you have a doctor on the board, a lot of times you're like, well, we got a really great new product, whether it's a intravenous or a new type of respirator, but nobody really telling you the sales process. So, okay. If you guys want to introduce yourself.
Sure. My name's Damar Griffith. I've been in MedTech for over 27 years, everything from a sales rep, boots on the ground, all the way to CEO of a worldwide ophthalmology company in 150 countries. I love the sales process as it relates to medical device or anything that goes in a hospital. So if you are looking for a bit of information or nuggets on how to get there, I can help you out, and I'm happy to share in any capacity. And then we have...
Awesome. Hey, everybody. I'm Trevor Johnson, VP of Partnerships at Handle Global. We're a Series A stage SaaS company that sells software into health systems to help them streamline the equipment procurement process. So basically everything that they've been talking about, but just the workflow side of it. So what actually happens when supply chain says yes, when the VAC says yes, all that good stuff. Damar and I work together at Ethicon, which is a division of Johnson & Johnson that does surgical devices, laparoscopic and open. So it's in sales and marketing there, and then a couple of other technology roles. Sidebar, I also run a healthcare networking group in Cincinnati. Damar and I are up from Cincinnati. So we do a healthcare networking group down there that focuses on innovation and just kind of the innovators in that ecosystem. And I get folks who reach out to me from Columbus and they're like, is there something here in Columbus that talks about healthcare innovation? And so if anybody feels motivated or at least wants to learn more about that, happy to chat.
I'm sorry, and I didn't even tell you what I do today. So today, I'm like so excited about the sales process. I run Griffco Strategy, which is a MedTech commercialization company. I handpick which companies we should work with. I love working with the founders who created the idea and are trying to figure out what to do next. That's my sweet spot. I love that. It's hard, it's fun, and it's awesome when their eyeballs light up and they see the opportunity, and I want to see them go from an idea to fruition to exit. So that's what excites me. I'll pass it over.
Okay, so to dive into this, what I wanted to kind of start with is a scenario a little bit. So let's say that I am in the MedTech realm. I have a company scaled up or ready to kind of go to market. I have a product, and I traditionally have a doctor on my board. Can we talk a little bit about approaching different clinicals or hospitals, how you guys have seen it, what kind of successes, and should I just go directly into it? Like what would be your recommendation if I'm struggling to gain quote unquote traction, as the VCs call it?
The first thing I'd say is think.
There's a lot to tackle. So.
I know.
Yeah, you can be as bold as you want. That's what I hear all the time.
Yeah, so. I mean, for me, I'm extremely strategic and tactical at the same time, because most people say, hey, I want to go to the CEO of the hospital. Wrong. I want to go to the most important doctor in the hospital. Wrong. You actually got to start small and find someone who is probably not the ideal KOL target to get the information you need, so you understand who the stakeholders are within the facility. You have to then go through the exercise of stakeholder mapping, and then the economic mapping, and then the clinical mapping. And then even if you may not get the KOL to use your device, as long as they are not someone who will block the ability for you to get in the door or to the right people, just get them to say, yeah, listen, you talk to me. And then you follow through. I'll stop there. I will give you an opportunity to talk. I can keep going forever.
No. I always think about this as like, what's the smallest unit of work I can do to de-risk commercially the proposition that I'm trying to accomplish? So if it's a medical device, I'm establishing my clinical KOLs, but then who I feel like this is dying.
Did you just try pushing power button there with it?
Boom. What's the smallest unit of work I can do to de-risk this proposition? And a lot of smaller medical device companies that I've talked to in Cincinnati, they really miss defining the unmet need and figuring out like, is this a nice to have versus a need to have? There's a lot of nice to haves, not a lot of need to haves. And so to Thamar's point, when you find that right clinical stakeholder at the right level, they probably only have 1 to 5 shots on goal in a given year. So how are you going to basically create a proposition and galvanize their advocacy so that they use one of their 5 shots on you? And it could be for personal reasons. It could be because you have, something that really is an unmet need specific to their practice. But I think it really, really starts there.
What I was actually going to say is that, as he mentioned, you need advocacy, you need a champion within the facility. One of the approaches that actually worked for me, and it consistently worked when I was in the field, is that you identify someone who's early out of medical school, and I don't mean like a resident, but it could be a resident, and you find that person who wants to make a name for themselves. And once you figure out who that person is, who has the relationships within the institution, the respects with the hospitals, even though they may be young, they are on fire to make a name and also, accomplish something within the facility. So whether it's introducing something new, and then he's the person, or he or she is the person who executed it, they'll help you through the entire process of the workflow to figure out from the IT person you need to speak to, from the nurse that you need to speak to, from the training that needs to happen with the device. People never think about that. They think about actually the widget being sold and the payment coming back, but they don't think about the executional every step of the way within the hospital. There could be 10 different departments that need to be touched for your single device. And you have to make sure that you've addressed everyone in the room, because when you get to that C-suite, when it's time to say, hey, we want you to sign off, there's someone in the C-suite that's like, oh, you didn't talk to risk management. Oh, you didn't talk to this other team. And so now you got to go all the way backwards and start over again. So those are really key things. So when I think about new device, who do I talk to first? I think about market development. And how do you do so? Is by getting the information you need first before you go in.
I think to call out to that a little bit more, I think a lot of people put doctors on their boards without thinking why they're there. They just think it lends academic credit when they're raising that stuff. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the key points to call out is that they can help you a lot with workflow. I know we were on a call not too long ago. Well, and I think it's understanding like not only the workflow of how you sell into there and get some of those clinical champions, but it's also understanding who's paying, when they're paying, right? I know Trevor's heard this story 5 billion times, but there was a medical startup that came out of Akron, and they developed a new pillow. So basically when you were getting your injections or when you were getting your IV lines, they typically use gauze, right? So they put the gauze there, they wrap it up. And so then they came up with a new idea that was a pillow that they made. They got into hospitals, but then they had a huge problem because they didn't understand the workflow of the people that did the work. And so when they were selling, the hospitals by quantity, but the hospitals didn't say use. So the hospitals then thought, oh, nobody's using these, are crap. But what they didn't realize is they put it in a cabinet 2 doors down the hallway. And when you're in the thick of it, you're not going to go out, open a new packet. You had to be in there. And then they tried pivoting and they just couldn't. So yeah, so I think it's very underestimating, understanding the flow and then going through it. Yeah. Trevor, can you talk a little bit about your experience from that? Because I know you're kind of in the thick of it now and approaching these and getting those champions.
Yeah, and so what our startup does in part today is all those approval workflows we map out for hospitals. And so to what they were saying earlier, certain devices are going to need to go to infection control. Certain are going to go to the alarms committee. There's a group in North Carolina that has their own electrical like North Carolina as a state has its own electrical standards that are different. And so I'm just trying to sell a device. Like I'm just trying to help people. I don't care about North Carolina's electrical standards, but you have to, unfortunately. And so you said something, Thamar, that actually I was going to ask you about, because mapping out all those workflows, I mean, that's like our full-time job. And so as a young company where you have limited time, our experience is typically clinicians don't know they can't shepherd you through that process, especially somebody who's maybe younger, which I totally agree with your point. that they're going to be hungrier to help you. But really, that's where I think it's important to cultivate a non-clinical person on your board who can help you understand what the high-level requirements are for a value analysis committee. They can help you create a VAC pack to give to the clinician, because the clinician is like, I just want to do procedures and make money, and then this is another way for me to help people and maybe also make money. So I would just be curious to get to a question is like, how successful have you been in clinicians helping? Because we've kind of struggled with that.
It depends. Let me just clarify. I didn't necessarily mean a young person to be the one on the board per se, but just an advocate within the institution who can tell you who the right people are, or this person, that's going to be your roadblock. You should go to that person first and get their okay, that type of thing. So, but as it relates to just identifying the right doctor, you need to find out who is. There may be a KOL, and let me just make sure I'm clear on this. There may be a KOL who was published in all over the world, podium speaker, and then there's the doctor within the hospital in the specialty who makes the money for the hospital. That's who you need. The KOL is wonderful. They're great, they're smart, they're academic. The money maker, they keep the lights on. That's who you need to talk to. And that person, and I can give you, well, I don't want to take too much time, but I can give you specific scenarios of when that moneymaker is the one that walked in with me. I was 20-something years old. I didn't even know what I was doing, but I found the right person. He walked me in there, and I got the hospital to pay for something that was not even approved by Medicare that should be, and it was an outpatient device, and they paid for it outpatient. It was crazy.
Can you,
Yeah.
like this week, Cincy Children's is having their big event. And so I think there's a lot of non-traditional ways also to sell into hospitals. I remember talking to GE about how they sold blankets for babies in, but it wasn't something with a code and they got it back. So can you kind of explore that a little bit story that you just told
Okay.
a little bit deeper to say like, hey, look, maybe we're not through our code process. Maybe we're not through this. Like, how do you approach it? Because I think a lot of people view it code or nothing, right? So if I don't get it, like out of pocket's a joke. I don't want to deal with that. But can you kind of explore that?
Oh gosh, you know what I did? I got the hospital to pay for it. And you know what I did? I got them to lease it because it was a $32,000 device. And of course that goes through the capital budget, and that needs to be budgeted well years in advance. So you get it through the operational budget, leasing $3,200 a month. It's a totally different budget. You can get it through the door. And then how did you sell it? Risk. If this patient leaves this hospital and you knew that their, for example, ejection fraction was 35% and you let them go and they die, that's risk to the hospital. Do you want to risk the publicity? Do you want to risk the lawsuit? Do you want to risk all of these things? And guess what? It was $3,200. Do you really want to, is it worth it? No, sign my check. Let's make it happen.
One other creative pathway, depending on the device, that I've heard about a lot recently for some reason is using philanthropy dollars. So depending on the story, like this was in a pediatric setting. So it was essentially a gaming device to help kids breathe and breathe in and basically be relaxed during the anesthesia process. This came out of Cincinnati Children's, very cool. But basically, they're getting kind of like a compassionate use type of funding from these health systems. Like they go to a donor and they're like, hey, fund this thing. It's going to help kids. And it's just kind of a home run. So that's, there's one other example I had heard about, but that's, sometimes how hospitals are funding purchases these days.
They do have an indigent program too. So depending on the patient profile, and for that particular product that was elderly, so usually they didn't have the capital or the funding. So that's another angle as well.
Yeah, I think depending on how good your device is doing for society, I think it's interesting. We work with a lot of devices that help disabled individuals. So whether you have autism or whether you have cerebral palsy or any type of thing, and the funding avenues are I hadn't even thought of that. So that was a good call. The funding avenues are very different because you're not necessarily VC scalable, right? Like when you're going to a device that's helping a community that's underserved or that big, you can't really raise money the traditional way. And I think that's also where finding a insider goes far. So there's a lot of programs that I think people don't realize when you approach different hospitals or different services where they will take these devices that otherwise would not get traction and really help you gain a champion within the organization. I think it's approaching it not necessarily from a sales side, because I think a lot of people approach facilities in general, whether it's like if you're doing something for EMS or whether you're doing for, hospitals or for an outpatient, right? I think a lot of people approach it as money first. They don't always approach it like, how can I benefit them, or how am I bringing value? Because I think your story does a really good job of telling, like, hey, look, we showed them how we're going to do risk mitigation. We showed them how they could be a community, not necessarily giver backer, but, really help when somebody releases. Because I think now at CHPN, I've heard a couple stories where you have these outpatients where they kind of just dump them out, and especially within the addiction realm, and there's no really anybody to pick it up. So to your point, to be able to help that with Smooth just helps with their numbers and their results.
One other thing I'd add, because you just touched on something, that very same device I was talking about, it was there was workflow intensive. Extremely workflow intensive, and I'm like, this is such a pain in the butt. Like, by the time we close the sale, it's like there's 40 things that need to be done. It was a nightmare. And I'm like, how do I simplify the workflow? And I gave them the document, and I'm like, this is exactly what needs to be done. You call me, I do it. Because as long as they have to do 4 different things, they're not doing it. I'll give you one other example. Pharmaceutical rep, 20-something years old, really. I'm in Manhattan on Park Avenue selling to this important doctor. I didn't know, you don't know what you know. You look back like, what was I thinking? But I did a good job. But anyway, you walk in and then you go into the office and then you have a pharmaceutical and it's not covered yet by Aetna, for example, right? It's not covered by Aetna, but then, I have a discount card that you can have your patient fill out to try to get some whatever. Now, guess what? You have to get the person in the office staff to get and sign this thing and work with the patient. And they hated it. And so it's like, how do I get that person to be my friend? How do I get that person to contact me? Send me a text message and tell me when this happens. I'll shoot over there and I'll do it for you. Because otherwise you lose and miss the potential opportunity. And then on the last part of the patient being discharged home, there was a point where the nurse at the hospital would have to train the patient how to use the device. They don't have time for that. They got 10 patients that they have. So I'm like, ping me. I hired someone to train the patient, train the family, go home with, once the patient got home, call us if you have a problem. Don't call them, right? Because at the end of the day, we're simplifying their life.
I think it's interesting. We had a discussion right before this where we were talking about how you want to be unknown to them, right? So you don't want to approach them with something that's totally off the wall, something they've never seen about. You want to feel more of like, I guess I'd put it this way, that probably isn't the correct way, but like they're coming home, right? So when they show up to work, you just want to be that mouse. You want to be that paperwork that they're already doing. And it's not something that they have to think harder or change about. I'm going to kind of do a little bit of a pivot here, but I think it's kind of relevant. Trevor, can you talk about, we had a good discussion about this, I think last week, about how to understand how to approach them. So are you replacing something? Are you one-time use? Like, how are you knowing that you're going to fit in? And then how do you navigate those waters when you're selling into a facility?
I think you're talking about like what budget are you fitting into, essentially? Yeah, Thamar had a good example with the leasing piece. So a lot of what our software does, we work with capital. So if a lot of hospitals, depends on how much the capital costs, but most, if it's $5,000 or more, they're going to define that as capital. Capital goes into a totally different approval bucket, a totally different budget. And so that's like a whole thing. And then there's the consumable, obviously. And then you might have service on top of that. And like all of that dictates sort of the Plinko, kind of an old school reference, the Plinko of like where your approval goes and how you get that clinical advocacy to translate into approval. You're probably going to be asked if you're on a GPO contract. You're probably not going to be on a GPO contract, which is okay. You just have to negotiate a local agreement, and that's like a standard known thing. And then once you negotiate the agreement, then you actually have to go and get the PO cut. So there are all these little steps along the way.
And the materials management department in the basement of the hospital, in a corner, in a dark, dark room, is where that person sits. And you need to become their friend.
And they all like Chick-fil-A.
And they like Chick-fil-A. Mine like coffee. Mine like Starbucks. This was when the beginning of Starbucks, the beginning of Starbucks era.
Can we talk, so on that note, right, so when I started learning about medical sales, how to get into there, it was a very long journey to understand what, I know this is going to sound a little bit bad, what salespeople do, right? So I think sales within the medical realm are a little bit different. Can we talk about the expectation of like, if I'm going to sell, should I sell? Should I partner with somebody to sell? You know, and then also what kind of that sales looks like, because I know when we talk about like surgical equipment, right? Like they're in the room while the doctor's operating. So I think when people sell, they expect to, and may be wildly wrong, but from my experience, people expect to be like, here's a piece of paper, you bought it, and then they disappear. Can we talk a little bit about the process of that sale, and then once you kind of have it?
And because I keep ordering.
Commercially hand it over. So.
You go ahead.
So yes, in short, let's talk about that. So I think a lot of folks sort of, when I talk to startups, like I have an idea, maybe I'm benchtop, something like that, they don't think about that there are basically contract reps out there that you can pay who their whole thing is they just know a bunch of people. And you can just pay them to know a bunch of people and talk about your thing. I've had some, I'll say poor fits where we thought they knew all the right people. They did, but they didn't know how to talk about our product. And so you just wind up, I think there's a lot of learnings there. One of them is when you're structuring the agreement with them, we probably had too high of a retainer and too low of variable comp, because you want them super incentivized and super aligned with you in terms of when they sell, they make money, that's great. You want to pay them for that. But you want to pay them to just get on calls with you and tell you about pipeline status. You want, like, that's super frustrating. The other piece that I'll speak to, and then I'll pass the proverbial mic to you, is there's so much data out there, and I'm working, so one of the things I do in my partnerships role is work with capital equipment suppliers who want to know about all the health systems that we're working with and mapping out their workflows. They want to know about that. MedTech companies on the whole are really bad at using data. Salespeople aren't data people. They don't know how to use it. They, like, even if you ask them to input their quota, they're like, no. Like, I'm on my phone, I have no Wi-Fi, I'm in this OR in the basement, like, I don't know data. There is so much data out there in terms of helping target facilities, physicians. Yes, there's the definitives and the acuities and the IQVIAs of the world, but use AI and just like you can find some good data sets out there that will help you basically refine where you might want to target.
I have twofold. You talked about capital and you talked about distributors. And usually what I experience with some of the earlier stage companies, they have a great device and they're like, I'm just going to hire a distributor. He also talked about incentivizing the distributor. Before you say, oh, they usually say, oh, we have reps all over the country. Okay, great. What is the competencies of the rep? Do they have the capability to sell capital? Because all reps are not equal. Capital is a long, arduous process. It's technical. You need to know the product. You need to understand it very well. And then it's different from a syringe, right? A syringe is a commodity item. You don't have to train, right? That's one. And so understanding if they have the skills to sell whatever your device is. And then the second point is, what else does the distributor have that they sell? Because if they have another device that's more valuable and they can make $500 or $7,000 on it, they're not going to sell yours for $200, right? So think about the dynamics of what is in the bag. And one other point is if the call point, meaning they're talking to a cardiologist or they're in the operating room, if this distributor organization has thousands of reps, but they're in the cardiology department and you hire them and you need them in the OR, that's a wrong fit. Big mistake. So that's another part that I wanted to share.
Yeah, I was out at a medical event last week in Pittsburgh, and one of the doctors was doing microsurgery, right, which is a very niche thing. And so the way that they chose to license it, which I think was very fascinating because they wanted their sales rep to kind of push it. They also wanted a bigger company to buy them, is that they were looking at what other items they sold, and then they were just looking at reps that they kind of slid in their portfolio. So they went to the guys that sold the tools for super micro, and then they're like, hey, look, why don't you just sell us as part of your kit? And then for them, it wasn't a huge revenue source, but because they're already selling it, it's such a low lift for them, and they're already in the workflow, they already know the process, they didn't have to figure any of that out, and it was very instrumental.
But was it a commodity item, or was it an item that needed to be provided with some level of training?
So the not to get too detailed into
Okay,
it,
that's
because
fine.
I now know way too much about super and microsurgeries, but it was an item that would help. It's a very rarely performed medical procedure. So some doctors will maybe do 40 times a month. Sometimes they'll do it once every year. And so their device was part of the larger package in the fact that it helped them use the other device. So it was made by a doctor to help doctors suture faster and better that otherwise wouldn't see that many. It was a very interesting product.
I can speak one more thing. We had a device. The team that we had wasn't that strong, but there was. Let me rephrase it. They weren't strong with that particular device, and but there was a kit packer, like you just described, where if you put this device in that kit, it rounded out the kit, and so we actually sold to the kit packer, and then they sold it on our behalf. But then when the kit packer decided that they wanted to OEM their own product, then we lost the opportunity there. So.
I think it's interesting with the avenues in. I know I was talking to a startup recently that is in the area of like supplies that you would buy. So it's part of the supplies a hospital would already buy every couple years. And it was interesting that they originally were trying to sell directly into the facilities. But then the idea came up, well, why don't we sell into the guys that already sell the products as part of it? And then they don't have to worry about their GPOs. They don't have to worry about it. They just go, they get packaged, and it's good. And it's a non-traditional path in while still you can maintain brand recognition and that stuff without having to push it.
Yeah.
The other thing I wanted to hammer back at, or not hammer, but circle back to, was you mentioned about your champions. I guess once I get my champion, one of the big things that I've seen is maybe not nurturing or pushing or keeping that connection. Can you talk a little bit about your personal experience about once you find that person, what's the appropriate engagement? What's the expected engagement, right? Because I think that a lot of people get excited. They'll bombard them with emails, or maybe they'll find them and then 2 years later, they'll contact them again expecting it. Can you kind of walk through keeping that nurtured?
I still have those doctors on my cell phone.
Yeah.
I text message them. I Facebook them. Like, they're my friends. They're my friends. I don't know if I'm their friend. Let me clarify that. But it's not just getting something from them. And, it's also bringing value to them. So is there an opportunity? Is there something of interest that coincides with whatever we have? Maybe we can publish a paper together. Maybe we can publish a paper together. Or that same doctor, I'll give you an example. And this is a while back, but we didn't have Medicare coverage. We didn't have Medicaid coverage. We didn't have Blue Cross, but we had zero. And I'm going in there trying to sell something, $32,000, zero. And at one point, I'm like, I need your help. I need to get this Blue Cross customer, and it's going to open the door for the state of Florida, and then it's going to open the door for the rest of the country. We're a startup company. I need your help. And he's like, all right, what do you want me to do? I'm like, okay, this is what you're going to do. This is what you're going to say, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, we're going to get on the phone, and we're going to talk to the chief medical officer at Aetna or Blue Cross, whoever the company is, and this is what we're going to do. And he's like, okay. We get on the phone, and I'm like, you say this, right? He's in the background. I mean, I was so crazy back then, and it worked. And we got approval. The CEO of the parent company from Boston calls me, and he's like, how'd you do that? And I'm like, I mean, if there's no handle, you make a handle. And that's how my thought process was. And from that point on, we got the Medicare, we got the Medicaid, we got everything from every state, and then it propagated through all the United States. Eventually, the company was acquired. But it was my little self, like, adamant, like, you can do this, figure this out. And there's a lot of stories behind that too. But that same doctor walked me into the hospital system, big hospital system in Miami, Florida. Actually, it was in Fort Lauderdale, but anyway, in Miami, Florida. And I had like I said, I'm 20-something years old. I had my VP of sales come down from Pittsburgh. And I looked at him and I said, do not say a word in this meeting. I got this deal closed. You just show up because of presence. I need you here. Don't say anything. If you say anything, we're going to lose this deal. And I'm like, just come in there. I'm talking to this person. This is like a former Marine, and I'm looking at him in his eyes. And then we get into the meeting, and I look at him, and I'm like, so of course everyone's not looking at me. They're looking at him, and he's like, yeah, what did you say tomorrow? And and he passed it over to me. And eventually we closed the deal. The hospital, we got a lot of money that day. And at the end of the day, it's like, that's how it works. So you studies, this doctor became a trainer geographically. And last but not least, he helped close and open doors for a lot of things. So now when there was no usage, hey, XYZ hospital, that hospital's using it, and these are the 5 doctors using it. Are you going to be the one facility that doesn't even know what's going on? Are you behind that? Patients are going to go to that hospital instead of yours. And they're like, what do you mean? Tell me about it. All right, what time do you have? So,
I think that also calls out 2 very valid points. I think one is understanding the alignment of the facility that you're selling into. I don't think, so when you go to different facilities, so like when I talk to Cleveland Clinic, they tell you a very different narrative than when I talk to Cincy Children's. Cincy Children's wants to be about future care, preventative. They're big on that. They talk about that all the time. When I talk about Cleveland Clinic, it's very much on the money side, right? That's why they're so big. That's why they're all over the world. And so I think that's a very valid point to call out, like understanding who you're trying to sell to from a futures perspective, to understand that. I think that a lot of people also don't approach it from the studies point, right? So they don't go in and go, hey, how can I help you get better? I was talking to a medical company at CMU, a lot of Pittsburgh. That's where I've been. And so what they were talking about is how they were approaching from the educational vector. So they realized, like, look, in order to hit the doctors or the physicians or the nurses, they need to go into the schools. So how do they look at the feeder schools? And then a lot of the people at CMU are at UPMC, right? So if you get into CMU, you get your champion there. They found like, hey, look, this is an easy path. I'm sure they're going to kill me now that I said this. But, this is an easy path to get into UPMC. And I think that that's what a lot of people don't realize is like, look, sometimes the path to get there is a longer sales process, but that's because of the trust building. And I think you hit on a very note. A lot of people don't want to be viewed as a commodity, right? Like when you're working with somebody, they want to be a valued partner. I think a lot of people just look at people in the sales process as somebody that can give me something. And really, a good sale should be both ways. I always say it's like a marriage, right? You want to have communication. You want to get to know them. It may be a non-frequent family member, but you don't want to be the family member staying on the couch, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So it's getting to know.
You just said something. So very same geography, different doctor profile, different hospital profile. This one's more of a premium hospital profile. This doctor, well-respected, well-known, he would be considered a KOL. And so, what can we do to make this KOL happy? This KOL wanted money. I'm like, I can't give you money. But let me tell you what I can do. I was like, let me tell you what I can do. What we need is to develop the next stage of doctors to be familiar with this product. So what we did was we organized I'm like, what am I doing? It's like I was so fearless back then. And I pitched it to my parent company up in, not parent company, it was the C-suite up in Boston. And I said, listen, this is what we're going to do. This is what we're going to do. We are going to invite new early fellows in the cardiology realm. We're going to invite them to come to Florida to learn this device and understand the technology behind the device and how it saves patients' lives. And it's going to be a 2 to 3 day event where it walks through, it teaches them how to become a doctor, how to build their practice, but then it also teaches them about the device and how to incorporate all of these different elements. And then we did a small pilot program, 5 doctors, we flew them in. The educator was the physician. He got paid an honoraria to educate them. And now we have 5 new doctors who never knew about it, who's going to be going off into the University of the United States of America, and they planted the seed with this device. Universally, you like that, huh?
I think you hit on several valid points right there. I think that it's the networking effect, right? So it's building champions and then focusing on champions that maybe don't share the same goal from a facility level. Because I think that sometimes when we talk to the C levels, so I've talked to a lot of hospital CEOs, they're focused on the ROI, on earnings, on a lot of things that they're driving. I think to your point, the physicians oftentimes, or most of the time, hopefully, are focused on the lives, on the future, on where to go, and less on the earnings side. So
I might have to disagree with you there.
well, that's why I said most of the time.
Most of the time. There
was a lot of padding in there.
Yeah.
But I think to that point is finding the right person that will champion you as an individual that may not align. And then also what I've seen is that physicians will want to go start their own practice.
Exactly.
So it may be something to say, hey, look, like, what you don't want to do is everybody that's worked in sales is have a champion that you befriended and now just leave you because you kind of are left in the hang on what the larger organization is. But I think that could also be a power to your point is to say like, hey, look, what is this individual's goals? Are they looking to grow within the hospital? Are they looking to start their own? Like, where do they go? And I hadn't thought of that until you were talking about your partnership.
You know what's interesting? I have a neighbor across the street. He's a general surgeon. He opened up his own practice earlier this year. He invited us to the grand opening. And I go to the grand opening, I'm there, and then there's just one person sitting in the corner. And I'm like, who's this person? Like, is he a patient? And it turned out to be a rep. And the rep said, one day I just happened to I saw the new doctor name on the list in the area, and I walked through the door. The practice had no furniture, no anything, and I helped him build it out. And as a result, this doctor is like this with this person. And he's like, so I just show up. He invites me to everything now. And it's like, you're just really helping them. And another point that I'd like to make is some of these doctors, they're great at, they're great at the clinical side. They're not that great at the business side. And because they're not that great at the business side, what ends up happening is, and again, early days, I'm like, economically, look, this is what this could mean to your practice. And if you do this, this, and this will generate an additional $10,000 or $20,000 more per month for your practice. And it's not just about the money. It's about your ability to expand, to hire more people, to get the infrastructure of the IT, the equipment, everything you need. And this could potentially go from being a primary practice to an ASC if you do this right. So helping them from the economic standpoint, there are so many ways that you can help the physician. It's not just about being a sales rep selling a widget. It's about developing a relationship long-term and then bringing value. And oftentimes, I remember I worked for a company, it was a robot company, and they would call the reps button pushers, and it would make me mad because I came from sales, but now I'm doing all this higher level stuff. But I'm like, I'm a salesperson. How dare you talk about this? You don't know what they do out there. I was so offended, and I'm like, they bring in the money for you, you know. But at the end of the day, those reps are the ones who really made that company now successful, which was then acquired by Stryker. So respect the sales reps.
Yeah, so to flip this, I know we're getting close to time.
Okay.
Too. So to flip this, that wasn't for you. That was just in general.
Okay.
No, so what I was saying is, what if we flip it a little bit too? I think we've talked about how to find the right people here. How do you know if there's a tire kicker or if there's somebody that's not right, or you're not hitting the right doors, if that makes sense? So from your experience, how do you judge that? How do you gauge if they're the right person or they're just giving you ear service?
You want to go?
Yeah, so I'll just say the word that is super triggering for me is the word interesting. So anybody who says, oh, that's really interesting, I'm like, oh no, this is going to be, it's not even going to be a dead end. It's going to be even worse. It's going to be a drawn out, like, slow death. It's not, and if it converts, it's not the conversion that you want. So that's always a key for me is when someone's like, oh yeah, that's interesting. That means you can't articulate the value specifically enough to say why it's interesting. You're just like, oh, it's interesting.
Well, I'm going to push you here. Okay. And if they can't articulate the value, you didn't articulate the value.
Ooh, okay.
So, and at the end of the day, if they don't understand what is the gap on my side that I missed to hit the trigger mark for this person. And so that is a product of asking the right questions. So when you are probing to qualify whoever this person is in whatever capacity, if they're economic, if they're clinical, if they're support staff, asking the right questions is what's going to lead you down the path. So for you, your word is interesting. My question is always, when was the last time you did X? And if they were like, oh, it's been months ago, I'm like, out of here. Out of here, let's go somewhere else, you know? So, or the question is, if it's months ago, why? Why? I don't know how to do it. It's too hard. It takes too long. It's this, it's that. And it's uncovering the reasons why, which will help you really figure out how to make that no interesting into a absolutely, sign me up.
Yeah, interesting.
I get a little intense. Interesting. I didn't do a good job. I didn't do a good job.
Okay, so we're close on time. I wanted to open up. Does anybody have, I know we don't have a huge audience here.
Yeah.
Does anybody have any questions?
I guess I just want to make a comment. It was really enlightening for me because I was at a MedTech startup and I was building out support and implementation. But I come from like a business background and everything. It was just something I was passionate about. But a lot of what you shared kind of helped align it. Was just workflows. I think was the biggest thing I ran into. Is like it was sold to the doctor or like the program level, but then in primary practice or like in hospital settings, it didn't click because we didn't account for how it interferes with their actual workflow. Whether it was deploying the equipment, training the patients how to use it, we had a few different things. But like for the stuff that was being sent home with the patient, we took on some of that. But the in-clinic stuff, if they were doing something, it's like things don't work. And if you don't touch it all the time,
Forget about
that's another big piece. So it's like, that's kind of what I was always wrangling within the organization. It's like, guys, I'm seeing this with the front lines. Like, let's bottom this up. It's just good to hear that it's not, it wasn't an isolated thing.
Yes, it wasn't you.
Anybody else? Okay.
You're thinking.
I'm actually a PA, so I eat lunches with too many reps. They're a good company. But this is really interesting. I love the thought processes behind some of what you guys are talking about.
But even as a PA, there's an opportunity if you want to go beyond, seeing patients. You can actually still support some of these organizations in a different way from a clinical perspective, using your expertise to further educate other people, whether it's nursing staff, other PAs. They're no different than doctors. And you know firsthand that there's a lot of heavy lifting on what you do. And so people say, oh, the doctor, and you're doing a lot of the work. So we get that.
I think it's also interesting. So I'm part of the Society of Physician Entrepreneurs. So it's interesting to see both sides of it. So then that's physicians, nurses that are being sold to, right? So like when I was at JPM this year, it was my first time being sold a cancer drug. So they bought me like a steak dinner, all this stuff. And I was like, well, I'm the tire kicker.
Interesting.
Yeah, I'm the interested party in there. But I think the other thing too is it's interesting to see both sides, because when I've done the medical devices that I do, you'll see startups that totally whiff it on the other side. And then you'll even see doctors or nurses that work on the inside then develop something and then they whiff it coming back in because they're so used to being viewed as an expert, right? So they're the expert that does this, and they don't know how to come back in as that guy that now is selling, not that guy that's being sold.
Right.
So, okay, with that being said, do you guys have any last words of wisdom that would be interesting to people?
Interesting. That's scary now. I'm never going to see that word again. I would say if you are developing a medical device or in the process or thinking about it, speak to as many people as possible. I would say the one thing that is, I love helping startups. Like, I mean, I drove up here, from Cincinnati. I'm like, startup, yes, But when you're getting advice from someone who may be seasoned, experienced, have been doing this for a long time, and you know your product and you're so passionate about it, take a back seat and listen. Because oftentimes I'm like, if you already know it, you don't need to be on the phone with me, and I don't need to be spending time here because we're going to be arguing, and I'm looking at the whole world of all the different things that could have happened or could go wrong, and you're looking at this. So be open to hearing what others have to say. And on the flip side for me, I also need to be open because the fresh minds are the ones that are going to be ruling the world, and they'll be teaching me lots. And they still are right now.
I would just reinforce something I said earlier around like need to have versus nice to have. There's so many nice to have things that are just in zombie land, and just really try to talk to as many people as possible to figure out what people need to have.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think circling back is what we were joking with interesting, understanding your value. And I think that really is the hammering it home, what your value is, who are you valuable to, and are you making them money or saving them money?
Yes.
Well, thank you guys for talking. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.
everybody.
Thank you. Yes, thank you.